Hello, everyone. Welcome to PwC Tax Bite podcast series. My name is Peter, and I'm very happy that I can welcome Alan and Claire in my virtual recording studio. The reason I invited Claire and Alan is because there are a lot of developments in the indirect tax space, and more in particular, VAT in the digital age, or as I call it, ViDA. I'm very curious to explore with Alan and Claire and with this audience what this is all about, what the impact can be. So welcome, Alan. And Alan is, for the people who do not know her, leading our e-invoicing center of excellence out of Belgium, Brussels. And Claire, who is co-leading the digital network. So I think with both of you, I have the right brain power in the room to talk about this development, this topic. Maybe to start with the beginning, let's explore a bit what it's actually about, this ViDA. Maybe Claire, can you explain that a little bit to the audience and also maybe touch on why it's so important for businesses?
Okay, thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. So, as you already mentioned, Peter, ViDA stands for VAT in the digital age. It is, in fact, an EU initiative, which is designed to modernize the current VAT system. It was approved last year in November 2024. And in fact, it introduces measures like a mandatory e-invoicing for some transactions, the extension of the so-called one-stop shop to more transaction types, and also new rules for platforms in sectors like accommodation and transport. The goal is, in fact, to simplify VAT compliance, also to reduce fraud, and create a more uniform system across the different EU member states. Now, these changes will bring significant compliance obligations for businesses, making an early preparation essential.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So I hear you mention also e-invoicing. So that seems to be an important part of the ViDA proposal. So Alan, let me turn to you. Can you explain a bit what is changing on that front?
Sure, Peter, and hello everyone also from my side. So what changes around e-invoicing? Well, e-invoicing and the so-called digital reporting requirements, or DRR for short, are a cornerstone of the ViDA proposal. They aim to digitize, they aim to standardize the VAT reporting across the EU member states. What does it mean practically? It means practically that, first of all, starting already as from beginning of this year, member states can require e-invoicing for domestic transactions without needing approval from the European Commission in order to implement this measure. Going forward, from 1st of July 2030, e-invoicing will become mandatory also for intra-EU transactions. And to put things in perspective, these are typically transactions that fall outside of the scope of the domestic e-invoicing measures that have already been implemented. So it means that businesses must issue structured e-invoices for all intra-EU transactions in a standardized format, and they must issue this invoice within 10 days of the taxable supply taking place, so shorter terms to issue the invoice. In addition to that, the information of these invoices must also be transmitted to the national VAT authorities in real time. Why is the European Commission implementing this? Well, they aim to reduce VAT fraud. They want to increase efficiency. But of course, as Claire already mentioned, it requires significant system upgrades for all businesses that will be affected.
Okay, Alan, I hear you say we go to a mandatory e-invoicing for all EU transactions July 2030. That must create challenges for businesses, this movement. What challenges do you see in practice?
Well, it's of course a transformative shift, which requires, and Claire also referred to it, very substantial preparation. Why is that? Because businesses will need to invest in systems that support that standardized e-invoicing and real-time reporting on top of that. It also requires changes in the current processes. Businesses will have to adapt their processes, allowing for faster reporting timelines, whilst currently you have the traditional VAT returns, the EC sales listings, the EC purchase listings that allow you for more decent preparation time, also cleansing time to make sure that the data you are reporting, that you're comfortable about that data. If everything, of course, needs to be reported in real time towards the national authorities, you need to be very sure about the quality, the accuracy of your data. What it also means is that businesses must be able to handle both domestic and intra-EU requirements, which may not always be the same. So ViDA is indeed aiming to harmonize things a bit better, but you see that there's still a lot of fragmentation in compliance requirements across the member states, which businesses must also be able to manage.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. So, of course, several member states have already introduced e-invoicing today. In Belgium, I know it will become mandatory as from 1st of January 2026. How does ViDA relate to these local e-invoicing requirements?
Yeah, great question. Well, although the national initiatives and the ViDA initiatives are not necessarily following the same timelines, the same model, you see that, well, first of all, ViDA is really accelerating the implementation of national e-invoicing systems. And you see that the biggest economies in Europe, like France, like Germany, like Poland, but also Belgium, like you mentioned, indeed will move towards a domestic e-invoicing and or real-time reporting system well in advance of that ViDA implementation timeline of July 2030. What you also see, on the other hand, is that member states are having really the ViDA model in mind when they are developing their national systems. Why is that? Because ViDA will require them to converge their national systems insofar it differs from the ViDA principles towards that EU common model by January 2035 at the latest. So if they are not aligning their national implementations now, they will have to change them over time, which is, of course, creating, again, friction for businesses, which is why they are already having the ViDA principles in mind when implementing their national systems. So I think it's important for businesses to not only look at the European initiative, ViDA, to assess that impact to their business, but to also to take the unilateral models in mind as well when companies are defining their strategy around technology, around process, around the people impact that all of this will have to them.
Okay, and the mandatory introduction of e-invoicing is one layer of this ViDA project. So cross-border transactions will be subject to that e-invoicing. Will this be the basis for new digital reporting requirements as well then, Ellen?
Yeah, that is correct. So it's indeed the intention to use e-invoicing as the basis for a digital reporting requirement, whereby what is currently in place, so the EC sales listing, the EC purchase listing that is also implemented in some member states, that is, of course, aggregated a bit behind the facts, if you wish, to replace that with a more real-time version of sharing of information. But in a standardized manner. So ViDA refers to the usage of a standard, the so-called European norm, the EN 16931 for the people who know the concept. It is a standard that is already widely used in a business-to-government e-invoicing context. And they will use that as the basis for invoicing, to standardize basically the way that data is presented, the way that data is available on the invoice, as the basis for reporting of that information as a subsequent step. And you see that even though it's possible to deviate from the usage of the standard, for instance, if you're in retail or in automotive and you have already invested widely in using EDI processes, for instance, within your business, it is still possible to do so, but you need to be sure at all times that interoperability with that European standard is guaranteed. Why is that? Because it's the only way to standardize the reporting process, which will be implemented as a second layer as well. How it will work is that it will be the national authorities who need to gather the information that needs to be exchanged according to ViDA. And they need to ensure that this information is then fed to the new version of ViDA. And you may already know the ViDA platform because it's the platform that is used today for VAT ID validation, the collection of information of the currently used EC sales and purchase listings. So that information will be fed to the new version of ViDA. And there it can, of course, be compared with other pieces of information. Think about, the supplier reported data, the buyer reported data. So that's an easy check, but it can, of course, also be compared with other sources of information, which will be definitely the next step of the process.
Okay, yeah, Ellen, it's very clear. We're moving towards a lot more information available to the authorities. We talked a lot about the e-invoicing proposal, but understand, Claire, the ViDA proposal also has some other major changes. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on those?
Yes, correct, Peter. So the proposal also includes, first of all, the extension of the one-stop shop, also the introduction of a mandatory reverse charge mechanism, but also it will change the rules when it comes to the platform economy. Now, if we first have a look at the extension of the one-stop shop, so what is the one-stop shop? The one-stop shop is a system which already exists currently, and it is an optional scheme that allows a taxable person to register in only one member state. That member state is known as the so-called member state of identification. That scheme enables a taxable person to declare and pay VAT, which is due in various member states, through one single VAT registration. Now, it is important to note that the one-stop shop VAT returns are supplementary VAT returns, and they do not replace the VAT return a taxable person submits to their member state under the domestic VAT obligations. So the major benefit of this system is that the business will only have one member state of identification, allowing it to declare transactions taxable in other member states and thereby, of course, avoiding multiple VAT registrations and related multiple VAT compliance obligations. So this is a system which already exists. Now, ViDA will extend the use of that one-stop shop system to include, for example, the transfer of own goods. So when currently a company transfers own goods from one member state to another member state, a VAT registration in the member state of arrival of the goods is required. So as from then, purely on the basis of the transfer of the own goods, the business will be required to register for VAT purposes in the member state of arrival and will be liable to file local VAT returns in that member state of arrival. Well, to the extent that the company would opt to use the one-stop shop, it can avoid such a local VAT registration and it can avoid such a local VAT compliance obligation. So that was, in fact, the first pillar, next to e-invoicing, of course, so the one-stop shop. Next to that, as I stated, Peter, there will also be the introduction of a mandatory reverse charge mechanism. So under ViDA, it is foreseen that for local supplies of goods and services performed by a non-established supplier, a mandatory reverse charge mechanism will be introduced. This will, of course, further eliminate the need to register for VAT purposes. Now, some member states have already introduced such a mandatory reverse charge mechanism. We, for example, in Belgium, we have such a local reverse charge mechanism, which is foreseen in our Article 51, paragraph 2.5. So whenever a non-established company performs a local supply here in Belgium, to either a Belgian established company or a foreign established entity which has appointed a Belgian fiscal representative, the supplier will not be liable to issue an invoice with application of Belgian VAT, but the VAT will be due by the customer under application of the mandatory reverse charge mechanism. This will, of course, further eliminate VAT registration obligations in the hands of the non-established supplier. And then last but not least, there is a change in the platform economy rules. So from 2030, optionally from 2028, platforms which are facilitating short-term accommodation and passenger transport will be required to collect and remit the VAT for non-VAT registered sellers. And this is, in fact, Peter, a very short overview of the other rules which are foreseen within ViDA.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Very clear. Now, based on your experience, Claire, these additional changes, how do you see the impact for the business?
Well, yeah, it's clear that, for example, the one-stop shops or the extension of the one-stop shop on the one hand and the further extension of the domestic reverse charge mechanism, they aim to reduce compliance costs because they will eliminate VAT registration obligations. However, these rules will, of course, also bring new obligations. As I just stated, for example, for the platforms in the accommodation and transport sectors, they will face additional administrative and financial responsibilities, potentially, of course, increasing costs for smaller businesses operating on these platforms as well.
Okay, thanks a lot, Claire. So a lot of changes, a lot of impact, and I must say I'm very happy that we could address this indirect tax topic in this podcast series. Many people in the audience are responsible for taxes, for indirect tax, maybe in their organizations. So Alan, before we close the podcast, I wanted to ask you, what would you recommend the people in the call to do with all these changes?
Yeah. Well, of course, the changes are transformative, as we try to explain in this podcast. So decent preparation is really key, and starting up the preparation now is also key. So businesses should really evaluate both their VAT registration, their compliance strategies for their business. So that's first thing, the impact to their existing processes, transaction types, etc. They also, of course, need to make sure that from a technology perspective, they upgrade their systems to deal with the one-stop shop requirements, e-invoicing, the digital reporting obligations. And then thirdly, it's of course also important to engage with VAT experts so that they can really understand the specific impact that all of these massive changes have to their current operations.
Well, thank you very much, Alan, for those recommendations. Very useful, I think. Thank you for coming over, ladies, to my podcast, and I hope in the future we can keep on introducing important developments in the VAT landscape. But for now, I want to thank you for giving us this update on the ViDA, and also to the audience for tuning in. And I would say stay tuned for more updates. Thank you.